Welcome to the fifth part of my Scott Pilgrim Analysis series. In this video, we'll be doing a brief breakdown of the themes of books 4 and 5. Before we begin, I want to offer a quick spoiler warning. This video will expect that you've at least read the entire series before, as we'll be referencing the books before and after this one in our analysis. If you haven't, please do read them, then come back to this video. Without further ado, let's get started. This part of the retrospective has been the hardest to write. There was a world where these two books got their own separate videos, but that became harder to do as time passed between videos. I had to reread them several times before I even attempted to start scripting. The more I read, the more I found that compared to the first 4 volumes, Versus the Universe and Finest Hour gained their most insight when paired together. They're in dialogue with the rest of the story and with each other. They work as the big finale, a final test for these characters and a jumping point for the next stages of their lives. As such, this analysis will discuss both books and explore how they cap off the themes of the rest of the series. A comment on my video on Book 2 brought up the mountains of insight that could be mined from Kim Pine's brief aside to herself in that volume. Thinking about that moment and trying to expand on my discussion on Book 4, aspects of her character started to make more sense. For the longest time, I didn't think much of Kim. I liked her character well enough, but didn't think there was too much to explore. After thinking about that comment and that scene from the end of Book 2, it's easy to interpret Kim's dry and sardonic personality as an expression of exhaustion. There's this creeping sense of insecurity that's really hard to pick up on during a first reading of this character. There's this sense that she's trying to keep people connected, keep people together, yet still ends up forgotten in the end. One instance of this insecurity can be seen through her aside about Envy's appearance at the end of Book 2. Interestingly, when the band meets up for the concert, she's seen in a much more elaborate outfit than her usual style. It's almost as if she's trying to make up for some sort of self-prescribed inferiority in her appearance. There's also the instance of Book 3 where she brags about a fake date, only garnering ironic remarks from Scott and Stefan. She also jokingly lies about scrapbooking alone to Ramona towards the end of the same book. Another example can be drawn from a free comic book day story featured in the color edition of Book 3, where she fails to gain any courtesy from her roommates. Between books 4 and 5, Sex Bomb Bomb starts recording for a new album, reducing the amount of time the band is actually playing together, which seems to increase Kim's malaise. Of course, it's hard not to forget about Kim and Scott's strained relationship. Their romantic interactions came to an abrupt end when Scott moved away during high school and failed to inform Kim. This perpetual rejection comes to its natural extreme when Kim gets kidnapped by the twins in Book 5, where she pleads for Scott to rescue her as his resolve is at its lowest. In spite of this isolation, she's also always surrounded by people who support her. Support, yearning, and loneliness are a constant for Kim, always cycling each other out. Just as the shadow of loneliness seems to always follow her, maybe it's that yearning and appreciation of others that strengthens her resolve. We'll touch on that topic a little later. Between books 5 and 6, there's this idea expressed about the friction between desiring comfort and facing reality. Scott and Ramona are similar as they are both averse to discomfort and they both deal with it in different ways. Scott wraps himself in a cocoon of obliviousness, while Ramona drifts away. Around the beginning of Book 5, Ramona questions how easy Scott is able to get over his past breakups. Scott's non-answer actually reveals a lot. His secret is that he's stuck in the present. Whether he's in a good mood or not is dependent on whether the horrors of the past resurface to haunt him, or if the joys of his present are strong enough to uplift him. Ramona is stuck in her past. It dictates her path, and it informs her concerns for the future. This friction between chasing fantasy and running from the past arises from the necessity of facing the present. Knives facing Ramona about Scott's deception has always interested me. Life would have moved on if Ramona never found out, but would anybody grow or change? Would they be capable of facing their own flaws if they remained deluded forever? I think there's an argument to be made that chasing comfort that only masks hurt rather than treating that hurt is what causes these characters to repeat their same mistakes. Ramona spends a lot of her time contemplating on the possibility of Scott cheating on her, really stewing on the idea and letting it spoil her mood. My first thoughts when rereading book 5 was why it takes her so long to press Scott about it. Part of me wonders if she always assumed the worst, but was avoiding the truth in fear of the fantasy of a perfect relationship being shattered. I'm really interested in this idea of Ramona always bracing for the worst. I think about her reaction to Scott returning after fighting the twins. I wonder if she was thinking about what Scott would learn about her after fighting them and if their relationship would truly be over. She seemingly braces for rejection from Scott, but receives acceptance and grace from him instead. In her mind, they're both too broken to work things out. I wonder if it's the crushing weight of reality that always causes Ramona to run. Book 6 begins with Scott's purpose shattered. With Ramona gone, his band broken up, and his friends scattered, his soul has become hollow and his zeal for life has been completely eroded. He has begun his goblin era. In the first half of this volume, Scott limps around aimlessly, searching for his past loves to give him purpose. He first bumps into Knives, searching for validation. However, Knives has grown to understand and value herself. She's grown beyond her obsession and is incapable of providing the unconditional affection Scott craves. Even when deciding on some consensual smooching, they both find the experience revolting. At first, I considered the idea that they had changed so much that they became incompatible. However, I'm coming to realize that this reaction of disgust comes from Scott's real lack of understanding of who Knives really is. He really didn't care too much about who she was as a person, but what she was able to provide for him emotionally. It's easy to forget the early moments in their relationship where Knives' more serious acts of affection put Scott in a state of unease. Later, Scott heads off to a party to get some impromptu revenge on Envy Adams for breaking his heart. He fails in this petty endeavor and gets a firm reminder that he isn't some blameless victim, and he's also caused some considerable harm to people as well. Lastly, when he meets back up with Kim, does his attempts to inebriate himself with validation truly ends. Through this first half of the volume, Scott finds that everyone around him is growing up and moving on. Any attempts to hold on to the past fail due to how much everyone and everything has changed. Scott fears that moving on means facing an unending future of loneliness and misery, yet it's the potential for warmth that motivates him to become someone worthy of love. Our entrance into the grand finale sees Kim sending Scott to face off against Gideon, giving him a kiss for good luck. In the past, I used to find this scene endearing. Nowadays, it makes me depressed. For most of the series, Scott has done immeasurable amounts of mindless harm to the people around him. He really hasn't done much to deserve this gesture. Yet he's also at his lowest moment, where he wonders if anyone really believes in him. He's figuratively running on fumes. It's easy to view this gesture as a sign of pity, but even as I'm writing this script, I'm coming to realize that there are several instances where Kim provides encouragement for Scott, or even puts her confidence in him. It's easy to forget behind all the dry wit and sarcasm that Kim truly cares for Scott and the people around her. It's also real easy to focus on all the harm that Scott has caused and forget about how much he was able to inspire and bring his friends together. Why would Ramona be so distraught about Scott's deception if he wasn't capable of truly making her happy? It's Scott's fears of rejection and loneliness that causes him to break the relationships around him, and it's his hope that strengthens them. I guess the day Scott Pilgrim loses all hope is a bad day for all of us. Remember in the first video of this series where I mentioned the concept of the nonsense threshold? Yeah, it's time to come back to that. For a quick refresher, the concept refers to the increasing absurdity of the Scott Pilgrim universe, contrasted with how comfortable the cast is with its strangeness. I think an easier way of exploring this concept would be the examination of the intersection between the themes of the story and the lore or world building. For a majority of the series, the absurdity has been fuel to keep the plot moving. For instance, Mr. Chow chasing Scott through subspace is our bridge to the climax of Book 4. Concepts like vegan sidekicks and supermarkets that make you go insane are simple enough to add charm to the story without weighing it down with needless exposition about how they work. In other words, the nonsense adds flavor to the story while not getting in the way of the emotional drama. Elements like Gideon and the glow seem to go against this philosophy. These plot elements are built up as critical parts of the climax, but I personally believe that they end up dragging the story of the last book down. Before I express my issues with these elements, I first want to examine how they contribute to the core themes of the series. Let's begin with an examination of the glow. Sporadically throughout the books, Ramona's head will begin to glow. Often this is when Gideon is mentioned, but also occurs during moments of discomfort and irritation. I like to believe that the glow represents forced introspection. In Book 6, it's described as being trapped in your own head with the worst version of yourself. It's easy to assume that the glow is inherently a bad thing, as the only information we gain about it is from Gideon, who we know is a huge jerk, and Ramona, who clearly isn't thrilled with being injected with a psychological weapon. It might be more appropriate to describe the glow as a means of examining all aspects of oneself, the good, the bad, and our greatest desires. It's easy to see the glow as a disabling element, but there are just as many moments in the books where it's shown to empower. The easiest example of this is Ramona's ability to teleport via the glow. In the final moments of Book 6, Gideon seems to gain increased strength via the glow as well. One last, more abstract example would be the concept of the Nega Scott. This figure emerges towards the end of Book 4 when Scott seems to be infected with the glow. The Nega Scott shows up towards the middle of the last book to face Scott. While initially Scott perceives this doppelganger to be an enemy, it reveals itself to be Scott's repressed memories of Ramona. The two merge into one, restoring Scott's memories and his drive to fight for Ramona's love once more. Through all these examples, it's clear to see that Scott and Ramona gain some sort of insight by embracing or coming to terms with the glow. What Gideon might have construed as the worst aspects of ourselves could be interpreted as what makes us human. The connection to the glow could be a representative of our desire for closure, for change, or a yearning for connection. The glow itself might not be the source of Ramona or Scott's internal conflicts, but rather a signifier of their greatest desires going unattended. Most of their problems come from prioritizing their own desires over the emotional well-being of the people who surrounded them. When I first started getting into the series, one of the most prominent comments I heard was that Scott Pilgrim's greatest strength was the fact that it was a love letter to gaming. I always felt detached from this perspective, as I never grew up with many of the games the books paid tribute to. In my personal opinion, the video game shonen anime facet of the series is only one facet of its appeal. Severed from the character drama, this element proves to be rather shallow. This is most evident with the final battle with Gideon. The shonen facet of the series isn't developed enough to create a compelling universe. As I explained before, the more fantastical elements serve to enrich the drama or humor rather than undergird any sort of substantial world building. All of this is evident with the glow. Let's look at the contrast between its contribution to the book's themes compared to how it contributes to the plot. Earlier, we were able to come to the conclusion that the glow represents forced introspection and unattended emotional needs, that it represents everything that makes us human, both the good and the bad. Inversely, we know very little about what the glow literally is, what it does specifically, and what it's supposed to threaten. For comparison, if we were to strip the evil X's of any sort of symbolism, they still pose a pretty clear threat. If Scott doesn't fight them, they'll kill him, and he can't date Ramona if he's dead. On the other side, the threat the glow poses is rather unclear. We know it's some sort of psychological weapon, that it can empower people and it can allow people to enter and alter minds. What does Gideon intend to do with the glow? Control the mind of Ramona, potentially the world? I'm not sure how to feel when Gideon infects everyone in the Chaos Theater with the glow. This lack of definition robs the glow of any tension it could create. Isolated from the plot, the glow is a redundant literary device. Considered with the relation of the plot, the glow is an unclear threat. In earlier iterations of this script, I falsely assumed that Gideon was the evil X with the least amount of depth, that the only thing he contributed to the story was a flashy finale. While I do think Gideon is a flawed antagonist, I feel his issues are a lot more complicated. So, how does Gideon contribute to the themes of the series? Gideon represents the commodification and objectification of others. He consumes others emotionally for his own gain. Gideon is pretty upfront about how he views all the women in his life as objects, with his ultimate goal of encasing all of his favorite exes in ice to keep them as literal trophies. While Gideon has depth, it's his implementation into the narrative where issues begin. From my analysis, it's easy to come to the conclusion that Gideon is derivative of what Todd Ingram was able to achieve in Book 4. The difference between the two X's isn't necessarily in what they represent, but in how Scott interfaces with the themes they represent. Each X represents either a particular quality that Scott needs to embody or a shake-up to the status quo. Matthew Patel and Lucas Lee both represent a challenge to Scott's ego. They force him to either lean on his friends or find unintended means to claim victory at a point in the story where his arrogance is unchecked. After his ego has been challenged, Todd Ingram, Roxy Richter, and the twins both force Scott to be more proactive in his relationships, not letting his insecurities erode them. These fights are not purely physical. They force Scott to make some sort of emotional change, and his victory over the X represents a moment of growth. The thing that plagues the finale is that the fight lacks an avenue for Scott to demonstrate growth. The connection between Scott defeating Gideon and his recognition of their roles in the cycle of rejection seems unclear. This lack of connective tissue, bridging the character drama and fantastical action, causes Gideon to seem more shallow than he really is. It gives the appearance of Gideon being more of a homage to classic one-note video game villains, rather than a developed contributor to the themes of the series. Gideon and this final section strangely helps to display the true strengths of the comics, its characters, their growth, and the insight and themes mined from their growth. If Scott Pilgrim was a simple battle manga filled with inane video game references, I don't think this franchise would be able to sustain itself for so long. It's the combination of its thrilling action, its vibrant humor, and its rich characters that's caused these stories to endure for so long.